So for our project, we checked out the red, and we wanted to see if we could get a visible difference in the wall background being out of focus with a shallow depth of field. So we checked out the red and threw it up on the tripod, starting with the 20mm lens. We put up the space lights at a daylight bright temperature because we booted up the city background. Then we also got a can light out to sort of fill in a little bit more sunlight. So we were wondering which of the three lenses, the 20, the 50, and the 85, would make the background look most naturally out of focus. My guess is that the 85mm lens is going to look the most naturally out of focus on the wall because it's such a tight lens. After we set our lighting, we set our focus with the 20mm lens, then we changed out the lens for the 50, and then after the 50 for the 85. Each time following the, roughly following the X's on the ground.
So when we came up with the hypothesis, I feel like a big question is trying to figure out why wouldn't you just blur the background? Why would you actually swap the lenses to try and achieve that? And I think a big reason for it kind of comes down to the fact that if you do have actual physical elements within your environment, you can't blur those like you would blur just the wall. So being able to swap through lenses and see which one looks most natural when being compared to the wall is a very important thing to try and figure out. Switching out between the lenses, the 25 just looked, there was almost too much detail. Maybe with proper lighting you could be able to fix that, but otherwise you're just kind of left with a real person slapped in front of a screen. The 50 definitely, I think, looked the best out of all three of them. You get a nice blur, good depth of field, but it's not so much to where you start losing information, unlike the 85mm. The 85mm, you started to lose information from the background. With the city being a very commonplace and known, it's pretty easy to decipher what it was. But if we were, say, on the alien planet that you can load up on the AR wall program, then you're going to start losing bits of information that's probably going to be important to the story you're trying to tell, and therefore your audience isn't going to try and fully understand what you're trying to communicate. So I think finding a good balance between actual depth of field between the wall and your positioning of the camera is really important to make sure that you retain information, but it's not so much so to where it's blatantly obvious you're just standing in front of a wall.
So I had originally thought that either the 85 or the 50mm was going to be the ones that stood out for what we were looking for, and surprisingly it happened to be the 50. And also during our experiment, you could also, I was mainly watching the TV rather than the monitor. I was looking at both, but I was watching the TV more, and you can, going off the TV, it looks completely different from what you actually see from the red, which I found was pretty interesting. So
I'll be honest, if I didn't know already, we kind of saw it when I was racking focus, but if I didn't know that that was said cafe or that says deli and cafe,
Yeah.
like I can read it clearly here, but if I didn't know that already, don't think I would.
You wouldn't be able to
guess
make
that.
it out. And so it's like using the lenses to kind of help blur the background a little bit helps sell the realism just because you can't notice the
I mean,
imperfections
if
with
you're
it.
really trying to make the background fall out into nothing.
Yeah. One downside you could face with going up in terms of millimeter for lenses is you're going to start cutting in more and more on whatever subject you're trying to film. So if you're trying to get a wider shot or showcase the majority of the screen, you're kind of going to be put into an awkward position when you're having to cut in every single time you bump up a lens, unless you put the camera in the corner of the room, in which case maybe you can achieve that, but I don't know. So overall, I think this experiment was pretty informational, especially when we're trying to figure out the relationship between the camera and the wall, and just figure out what is a good middle ground between the two of them.